Hello and welcome back to Following Science. I'm your host, Richard Raparel, and today we're exploring two of the most intriguing and urgent topics in modern medicine, the antibiotic crisis and the placebo effect. Now, these might seem like two completely separate issues because one deals with the survival of life-saving drugs and the other deals into the fascinating interplay between the mind and the body. But stay with me because by the end of this episode, I think you'll see how these two phenomena are interconnected in surprising ways. So, why are we talking about this today? Well, antibiotic and placebos both represent extremes of medicine, its limits, and its untapped potential. On one side, we have antibiotics, the workhorses of modern healthcare, which are under existential threat as bacteria evolve resistance faster than we can develop new drugs. On the other, we have the placebo effect, a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of what effective treatment really means. Now, I'm going to break this episode into three parts. First, we'll delve into the antibiotic crisis, then we'll explore how it began, what's at stake, and what we can do about it. Next, we'll take a journey into the placebo effect, unraveling its mysterious power and its implications for both medicine and psychology. Finally, we'll tie it all together and ask, what do these two issues teach us about the future of healthcare? So grab a cup of coffee, or tea if that's your thing, and let's jump right in. Now, our story begins in 1928 with Alexander Fleming, who is a Scottish bacteriologist who, in what might be the greatest oops moment of medical history, discovered penicillin by accident. Now, the story goes that he left some petri dishes of some bacteria uncovered, and when he returned, he found that a mold, penicillin, had killed the bacteria. What followed was nothing short of a revolution. During World War II, penicillin saved countless lives by treating infections in soldiers. By the 1950s, antibiotics were so widely available and quickly became the backbone of modern medicine. They allowed us to perform surgery safely, treat diseases like tuberculosis, and even make childbirth far less dangerous than what it used to be. But fast forward to today, and antibiotics have become so commonplace that we often take them for granted. But here's the catch. Bacteria as living organisms evolve, and when we use antibiotics, especially when we misuse them, we're essentially applying evolutionary pressure, encouraging the survival of bacteria that can resist these drugs. Now, let me break it down. When you take antibiotics, they don't just kill the harmful bacteria causing your illness. They also kill off beneficial bacteria in your body. In that mix, there may be a few bacteria that are actually naturally resistant to the antibiotics. But these resistant bacteria do survive and they multiply, and over time, their resistance can spread to other bacteria through something called horizontal gene transfer. This is essentially a bacteria's version of sharing cheat codes. The result? Superbugs. These are bacterias like MRSA or multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which are extremely hard and sometimes impossible to treat. Now, how did we get to this crisis point? Well, there are three main factors: overuse, misuse, and the lack of new antibiotics. Let's start with overuse in medicine. Antibiotics are often prescribed for viral infections like the flu or common colds, even though antibiotics don't work on viruses. So, why does this happen? Well, sometimes it's patient pressure. People want to leave the doctor's office with something tangible. Other times, it's precautionary prescribing, especially in cases where bacterial infections can't be ruled out immediately. Second, let's talk about agriculture use. Now, here's a shocking statistic. In the US, around 70 to 80% of all antibiotics sold are used in livestock. Why? Because they promote faster growth and prevent diseases in cramped, unsanitary farm conditions. However, the problem is that this practice creates a breeding ground for resistant bacteria, which can spread to humans through the food supply, water, and even soil. Now let's talk about misuse by patients. How many of us have stopped taking antibiotics as soon as we started feeling better? I know it's tempting, but this is one of the worst things you can do. Stopping early allows the strongest bacteria to survive and multiply, making future infections hard to treat. Now let's talk about a lack of new antibiotics. Developing new antibiotics is expensive and not very profitable for pharmaceutical companies. Why? Because antibiotics are short-term treatments, unlike drugs for chronic conditions like diabetes, which patients take for life. As a result, the pipeline for new antibiotics has slowed down to a trickle. So, what happens if we lose antibiotics? Well, it's not just a return to the pre antibiotic era, it's worse. Surgeries like C sections and hip replacements could become too risky to perform. Cancer treatments, which rely on antibiotics to prevent infections in immunocompromised patients, could become less viable. And even minor infections could once again be life threatening. Now, we're already seeing the impact. According to CDC, over 2.8 million antibiotic resistant infections occur in the US each year, resulting in more than 35,000 deaths. Globally, this number is much higher, and it's only going to grow if we don't act now. So, the good thing is, there are multiple solutions to this problem. Governments, researchers, and healthcare providers are working on multiple fronts. Let's talk about three specific ones. First of all, the stewardship programs. Now, these aim to educate doctors and patients about when and how to use antibiotics responsibly. So it prevents kind of like the misuse factor problem that we've been facing. Second, research and innovation. Scientists are exploring alternatives like phage therapy, which uses viruses to target and kill bacteria, and even developing smart antibiotics that can target specific bacterial strains without harming beneficial ones. And finally, third, regulation in agriculture. Many countries are now banning the routine use of antibiotics in livestock, but enforcement remains a challenge because it's been going on for so long. It's kind of hard to like stop that immediately and expect it to actually stop. So they're kind of slowly getting there, but they are getting there. So don't worry. Now let's talk about the placebo effect because we've already explored the antibiotic crisis, so we have to shift gears. Now, this placebo effect is something equally fascinating and in many ways just as perplexing as the antibiotic crisis. The placebo effect is one of those phenomena that seems almost magical, where the power of belief alone can bring about real measurable changes in the body. It's a testament to the intricate relationship between the mind and the body, and it challenges some of our most fundamental ideas about medicine and healing. So, what is a placebo effect? Let's start with a simple definition. A placebo is any treatment or substance with no active therapeutic ingredient, like a sugar pill, a saline injection, or even a sham surgery. But here's the twist. When a patient believes they're receiving a real treatment, they often experience real improvements in their symptoms. This is the placebo effect, the phenomenon that where the act of receiving a treatment, even if it's inert, can trigger changes in the body. These changes aren't just in the patient's mind, they can be physiological. Blood pressure can drop, pain can decrease, and even measurable biological markers like hormone levels can shift. Now, this is because we expect the placebo effect, or rather, the pill that we're given, even if it might be a placebo, to work on us. So we're unconsciously thinking that we're getting better. And because we think we're getting better, even though the pill is not like really useful in that, it kind of translates to our body. It just shows us like the transformative power that like the mind and the body have and its connection to each other. So literally your belief can manifest your body and like physiological state into being. So if you are constantly thinking that, oh, I'm always down, oh, my stomach always hurts, then it's going to hurt. So instead of saying that, talk about how your stomach's getting better, how you're feeling a lot better, feeling fitter, feeling healthier, because you never know. You're literally manifesting this into your existence. So, anyways, let's talk about the science behind the placebo effect. Because how does it work? Well, the placebo effect is a complex interplay of psychology, neuroscience, and physiology. Let's break it down. First, the power of expectation. When patients believe they're receiving a treatment, their brain releases chemicals like dopamine and endorphins. These are natural painkillers and mood boosters, which can directly reduce symptoms. Now, of course, this expectation can also activate the brain's reward system, creating a feedback loop where the patient feels better simply because they expect to feel better. Kind of like what I was talking about before. Second, there's conditioning. Have you ever heard of Pavlov's dogs? Well, they were trained to associate the sound of a bell with food, so they started even salivating before the food even came because they heard the bell. Similarly, patients that can be conditioned to associate taking a pill or visiting a doctor with feeling better, even if the treatment is inert. Like, I'll be really honest, every time I've taken a pill to like ease stomach pain or something like that, I feel instantly better, even though I know that the pill hasn't worked in the 2 seconds after I took it. This is kind of goes into like the placebo effect and what I expect to be happening, and I'm kind of conditioned to think that because I took the pill, I'll feel better. And so I suddenly feel better, even if the pill hasn't worked yet. Now, third, the role of context and ritual. Medicine isn't just about chemicals and a drug. It's about the entire experience. The white coat the doctor wears, the sterile environment of the clinic, even the way a treatment is administered. All of these contextual cues can enhance the placebo effect. For example, studies have shown that injections produce a stronger placebo effect and response than pills, and capsules are more effective than tablets. Why? Because these injections and capsules are perceived as quote unquote more serious treatments. Fourth, neurobiology. On a biological level, the placebo effect is closely tied to the brain's region involved in pain and emotion, like the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, in pain studies, brain scans have shown that placebo effects can activate the same neural pathways as opioid painkillers, essentially mimicking the effects of drugs like morphine. Now, the placebo effect has been recognized for centuries, long before we understood the science behind it. So, let me share some fascinating historical examples because it's so important to know the history behind medicine so we also are aware of our advancements, how far we've come, and more than that, we're kind of just aware of our past mistakes and the past things that work so we can use it in the future. So, it's kind of just like a tribute to the past to make sure that the future remains good. Now let's start with my first example, World War II and morphine shortages. During World War II, an army medic named Henry Beecher ran out of morphine while treating wounded soldiers. Desperate, he injected them with saline and told them it was a powerful painkiller. Remarkably, many of the soldiers reported significant pain relief. This experience inspired Beecher to become one of the pioneers of placebo research. Second, sham surgeries. One of the most striking examples of the placebo effect comes from the studies on knee surgery for osteoarthritis. Now, in one trial, patients were divided into two groups. One group received surgery, and the other underwent a sham procedure where doctors made incisions but didn't actually perform any surgical repairs. The results? Both groups reported similar levels of pain relief and improved mobility, showing that the ritual of surgery alone was enough to trigger recovery. And finally, third, fake pills for real relief. In the 1960s, a study tested patients with severe headaches. Some were given a strong painkiller, while others received a placebo. A whopping 40% of those who took the placebo reported significant relief. Even more fascinating, when researchers labeled the placebo as a strong painkiller, its effectiveness increased even further because it all goes back to our expectations and how we believe and how much we believe that the medicine is going to truly impact us. Now, today the placebo effect isn't just a curiosity. It's a subject of rigorous scientific research, and the findings are fascinating. First, placebos work when you know it's a placebo. And a groundbreaking study in 2010 showed us that even when patients are told they're taking a placebo, it can still be effective. In this trial, patients with irritable bowel syndrome were given placebo pills labeled as placebo pills, no active ingredient. Surprisingly, they reported significant symptom improvement. This suggests the fact of taking a pill can trigger a healing response, regardless of the belief. Second, genetic and placebo response. Did you know that your DNA can influence how strongly you respond to placebos? Well, some people have genetic variations that make them more sensitive to dopamine, which enhances the placebo effect. This is a growing area of research, and it raises fascinating questions about how individual biology shapes our experience of treatment. And finally, third, the nocebo effect. Now, if placebos can make us feel better, nocebos, or rather negative expectations, can make us feel worse. For example, if a patient expects a drug to have side effects, they're more likely to experience those side effects, even if the drug is inert. This is why communication in healthcare is so important. And also, I like to think of nocebos as kind of the evil twin sister of placebos, because placebos, we expect something good to happen, so good happens. Nocebos, we expect something bad to happen, so bad happens. Kind of the way of life works and manifestation and stuff. So, let's talk about where it gets tricky. The placebo effect raises some tough ethical questions. First of all, deception. Is it ethical for doctors to prescribe placebos without telling their patients? On one hand, it might help the patient feel better. On the other, it undermines trust in a doctor-patient relationship. Second, research integrity. Placebos are a cornerstone of clinical trials, but how do we ensure that patients fully understand what they're consenting to when they're placed in a placebo group? And finally, third, healthcare costs. Some argues that if a placebo works, they could have a low-cost alternative to expensive drugs for certain conditions. But would insurance companies ever cover a sugar pill? That's the questions. Now, let's bring it all together. What happens when placebo effects intersects with the antibiotic crisis? Well, two things happen. First of all, overprescription driven by patient expectations happen. Many patients demand antibiotics even when they're not needed, like for viral infections, because it does not work for viruses. Now, in most cases, in these cases specifically as well, the placebo effect could be harnessed. For example, doctors could prescribe antibiotic-like placebos to satisfy patient expectations when contributing to resistance. Second, education and empowerment. Educating patients about the placebo effect could shift the focus from quote unquote, I need a pill to I need a solution, fostering more responsible antibiotic use. And it also just kind of like mitigates the risks that this antibiotic crisis is showing us that like a lot of antibiotics have because of this resistance to bacterial infections. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question. What does the future of medicine look like when we understand both the limits of science and the power of belief? The antibiotic crisis reminds us that we can't take modern medicine for granted. The placebo effect reminds us that healing isn't always about the pill, it's about the process. Now, as I wrap up this episode, I really want to thank you all for joining me on this journey. If you found this episode thought-provoking, share it with somebody who might appreciate it too. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world of science. Until next time, I'm your host, Ritu Raparo, and this is Following Science. And also, before I leave, I just want to say that I love hearing from you guys, so please keep reaching out. It makes my day. Thank you. Bye.